All right, so today we're diving into something that's, I don't know about you, but it always kind of blows my mind a little bit.
Yeah,
We're talking about multiple consciousnesses, like the idea that there could be more than one consciousness existing within a single brain.
it's a fascinating area. And what's so interesting is it's not just theoretical.
Right.
I mean, we have real life cases, people who have undergone a procedure called split brain surgery.
Split brain surgery, that sounds intense. So we're going to be looking at what happens when the connection between the two halves of the brain, like literally severed, and
Exactly.
what that tells us about consciousness. And also, we're going to get into this thing called alien hand syndrome,
Oh, yeah.
which I've heard about, but honestly, I don't fully understand.
Right. It sounds like something out of a movie.
It does. And all of this is based on some pretty in-depth analysis of split brain research. So we're
Absolutely.
going deep today.
Yeah. Well, so split brain surgery, it might sound extreme, but it was actually first developed as a treatment for severe epilepsy.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't initially about exploring consciousness or anything like that?
No, not at all. It was a medical necessity. And what's remarkable is how many patients can function and function pretty well
Right.
after having this procedure, but it definitely leads to some very perplexing outcomes.
So essentially, the first split brain surgeries were to help people, not just to explore the brain.
Absolutely. Think about it this way. In severe epilepsy, you have these electrical signals that are basically short-circuiting between the two hemispheres of the brain.
Okay.
And that's what causes those really debilitating seizures. So severing that connection, which is called the corpus callosum,
The corpus callosum, yeah.
that was a way to kind of stop those electrical storms from overwhelming the entire brain.
And did it work?
It was a radical solution,
Hmm.
but surprisingly effective. I mean, many patients saw their seizures completely disappear
Wow, that's incredible.
after the surgery. But, with that success, a whole new set of questions came up.
Like, if you can function with your brain hemispheres separated, does that mean you now have two separate consciousnesses?
That is the million-dollar question, and that's where the work of neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga
Okay.
becomes really crucial.
Zazaniga. Yeah, I've heard that name.
He designed these experiments to investigate how split-brain patients process information differently.
So what did those experiments actually look like? I'm having trouble picturing this.
They were ingenious in their simplicity. So imagine a patient focusing on a central point on a screen,
Okay, got it.
and then words or images are flashed very quickly to either the left or the right side of the screen.
Oh, I see. So you're isolating what each hemisphere sees because the left visual field is processed by the right side of the brain.
Exactly, and vice versa.
Clever.
And the results were astounding. When a word like apple was flashed to the right side of the screen, the patient could say, "Oh, I see an apple, no problem."
Makes sense.
But when the word, let's say, key, was flashed to the left side,
What happened?
they would report seeing nothing.
Really? Nothing at all.
They might say, "There's nothing there," but here's the kicker. When they were asked to use their left hand, which is controlled by the right hemisphere,
Okay.
to draw what they saw, they would accurately sketch a key.
No way. So even though they couldn't say it, their brain was still processing it.
Absolutely. It was groundbreaking. The left and right hemispheres were working independently,
No.
processing information without the other one's conscious knowledge. I mean, the implications for our understanding of consciousness were
Wait,
huge.
so hold on. These patients had no clue that their brains were essentially having two separate experiences?
It's mind-boggling, right?
Yeah.
Until this experiment revealed it.
So their left and right hemispheres were literally experiencing different realities.
Different realities. One side was aware of the image but couldn't verbalize it, and the other was seemingly oblivious.
That just blows my mind. So each hemisphere, its own set of perceptions, thoughts, even intentions, like it challenges the very definition of what it means to be a single self.
Completely. And neurophysiologist Roger Sperry,
Ooh.
who actually won the Nobel Prize for his split brain research,
Wow.
argued that each hemisphere might actually house its own consciousness.
So like two separate streams of awareness normally working in sync, but suddenly revealed when that connection is severed?
It reframes how we think about the brain and the nature of consciousness.
It really does. It makes you wonder what other mysteries are hiding in our minds. Speaking of mysteries, there's this thing called alien hand syndrome,
Oh, yeah.
which takes this whole split brain idea to a whole other, honestly, kind of creepy
A
level.
little bit unsettling, for sure.
Yeah.
So alien hand syndrome, it often occurs after a stroke or a brain injury. It's basically a disconnect between the hemispheres where one hand, usually the left,
Uh-huh.
seems to act on its own, like independent of the person's conscious will.
Okay, so this isn't like a slight tremor or something. We're talking about a hand that, like, has its own agenda.
Exactly. Imagine a hand unbuttoning your shirt
Yeah.
while your other hand is trying to button it,
Oh, really?
or grabbing something from the grocery cart as the other hand is putting things in.
Wait, are you serious? There are real cases of this.
Oh, absolutely. There are even accounts of people struggling with a hand that's like determined to fight for control of the refrigerator door.
That's like having a mischievous gremlin attached to your wrist.
It's understandable why it's called alien hand syndrome.
Yeah.
The actions are so unexpected and uncoordinated, it feels like it's being controlled by an outside force.
Right, but it's not an outside force, right? It's still part of the brain, just not communicating properly with the conscious mind.
Exactly. And remember, the right hemisphere, which controls that left hand,
Okay.
it doesn't have a language center.
Huh.
So it can't verbalize its intentions. It just acts them out physically.
So it's almost like the right brain is saying, hey, if you won't let me talk, I'll just have to show you what I want.
In a way, yeah, it's fascinating and sometimes frustrating. It provides further evidence of just how complex the brain is
Mm-hmm.
and the potential for these like separate spheres of awareness to emerge.
This is all incredibly intriguing, but where does it leave us? Like, if a single brain can support two distinct areas of awareness, does that mean we all have multiple consciousnesses? Are we all just a collection of different selves working together?
That's a great question, and one that we're going to unpack further in the next part of this deep dive.
So we've been talking about how a single brain can actually have distinct areas of awareness, which is pretty wild. But what does that mean for those of us who haven't, had our brains split in half?
Right.
Do we all have multiple consciousnesses kind of just hanging out in there?
It's a really thought-provoking question. What if, our sense of self, that feeling of being a unified individual,
Hmm.
is actually more like a collaboration
Okay.
between multiple selves, each with their own unique perspective and maybe even motivations?
So instead of one me calling the shots, there's
Yeah.
like a whole team of me's back there?
Exactly. And this idea that's been explored in psychology, especially in the study of what used to be called multiple personality disorder,
Right.
now it's known as dissociative identity disorder.
So you're suggesting there could be a connection between, like, the dramatic split we see in split brain patients and these maybe more subtle internal divisions that we all might experience.
Yeah, it's definitely worth considering. Could those different personalities observed in dissociative identity disorder just be more extreme versions
Oh, interesting.
of the internal divisions we all have?
So maybe everyone has these divisions, but in most people, they're just, I don't know, less pronounced and maybe better integrated.
Think of it like an orchestra. You've got all these different instruments playing their own part,
Okay.
but together they create this harmonious symphony.
I like that.
In the same way, our different selves might normally be working together seamlessly, creating that unified sense of self that we experience.
That's a great analogy, but what happens when those instruments like start playing out of tune or one section is trying to drown out the rest?
Right, well, that's when we might start to experience internal conflict,
Hmm.
confusion, maybe even mental distress. I mean, think about those everyday things like memory lapses.
Yeah, like when you walk into a room and forget why you went in there.
Exactly, or you
Yeah.
suddenly blank on someone's name.
That happens to me all the time.
Could those be like glimpses into this complex interplay between our internal selves?
It makes you wonder if all those internal debates we have, should I have that extra slice of cake or should I speak up in that meeting? Are those actually different selves vying for control?
Yeah, and just like a team, those selves might have different priorities,
Right.
different ways of approaching situations. One self might be all about immediate gratification,
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
while another one is more concerned with the long-term consequences.
Oh, that's the one I need to listen to more often.
We all do.
This is really making me think about how I understand my own thoughts and behaviors. Like, we're not just individuals, but like entire ecosystems
Yeah,
of different perspectives and motivations.
And understanding this internal dynamic, it could be really valuable, both for our personal growth and for understanding mental health challenges.
Okay, now I'm really curious about this connection to mental health. So, if we consider these challenges as maybe arising from imbalances or
Yeah.
conflicts between these internal selves, what does that mean for how we think about treatment?
That is a great question, and one that we'll definitely delve into in the next part of this deep dive.
So we've been on this journey exploring this idea that, well, maybe the brain is more like a collection of different selves
Yeah.
rather than just one single unified entity.
It's a shift in perspective for sure.
It is, it's wild, but it seems like there's some real science behind it. But I'm really curious about what you mentioned before, this link to mental health.
Right.
How does this framework of multiple selves change how we think about these challenges?
Well, it could offer some new insights into why people experience certain mental health conditions
Okay.
and maybe even how we could approach treatment.
So instead of seeing things like, I don't know, depression or anxiety as purely chemical imbalances, are we saying we could also see them as like inner conflicts or miscommunication?
It's not about replacing one view, but more like adding to it.
Got it.
Think about it this way. Maybe depression, we could see it as a state where a more withdrawn or pessimistic self
Mm-hmm.
has kind of taken over, dominating the internal conversation.
Okay.
Or anxiety, maybe it's an overactive, fearful self that's always sounding the alarm, even when there's no real threat.
So those feelings, those thoughts, they're not necessarily wrong.
Right.
It's more that they're coming from a part of us that has its own way of seeing things.
Its own perspective, its own way of coping, yeah.
That makes sense. So how would this change how we approach, I don't know, therapy or even just personal growth?
It could shift the focus. Instead of trying to get rid of certain thoughts or feelings,
Yeah.
maybe we try to understand where they're coming from.
Okay.
What's their
Like
purpose?
instead of battling our inner demons,
Right.
we try to understand them.
Listen to them.
What are they trying to tell us?
Yeah, maybe even integrate them into a more, harmonious whole.
So it's less about silencing those voices, more about understanding their role in this inner team.
Exactly. Imagine if therapy was less about fixing what's wrong
Mm-hmm.
and more about helping different parts of the mind communicate better.
Like inner negotiation.
Yeah, a process of integration.
I love that idea. It's like we're not just stuck with whatever mental state we're in.
Right.
We can actually shape our inner world.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that we have agency even over the parts of ourselves that feel most difficult.
Yeah.
And by acknowledging that there are these multiple selves within us,
Okay.
we might even discover strengths and talents that we didn't know we had.
This has been eye-opening. It's definitely going to change how I think about my own mind
Me too.
and how I face challenges.
It's always fascinating to explore these new perspectives on the brain
Yeah.
and consciousness. We're really just scratching the surface.
Well, listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the brain. Who knew something as simple as me
Right.
could be so complex?
It's amazing.
And the potential for growth and change, it's remarkable. So next time you're feeling conflicted
Yeah.
or confused, remember, you're not alone in there.
You got a team.
You've got an inner team, and maybe it's time to call a meeting, listen to those different voices, understand their perspectives,
And
and work towards a more harmonious sense of self.
the journey of self-discovery.
And with that, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring that amazing universe inside your own head.